QB Chase.
G'day, listeners, and welcome to another episode of the Matter Mentality Podcast. We talk all things training, nutrition, and psychology to maximize your performance. Today, I am joined by a very special guest. We are just realizing how connected we actually were in the network of Instagram and social media and people in real life. Big Austin Stout. Now, he is coming off the back of his national show, which we're going to get into and no doubt talk about his 16 years, I believe we managed to drum up in the conversation of Instagram in the comment section, to which he's been competing. He's the owner and founder of Integrated Muscle, and we are going to talk all things psychology, gut health, the philosophies of bodybuilding. This is going to be a very deep conversation. I've been excited to have it for a long time. I basically got told at gunpoint to have this conversation with Dr. Danny Lamartina. She said it was a non-starter. It had to happen. So here we are. How you doing, my man?
That's funny. I didn't realize it was quite that intense, but that's funny. I appreciate you. Yeah, I appreciate you having me. I'm definitely looking forward to the conversation. I kind of did my little bit of scouting. I was like, "Yep, we're good." When I say scouting, it's only because I pretty much try to network with as many different people as I like, as I can. But when I say scouting, it's like I also am pretty particular with who I associate with. So like I just kind of want to make sure that this guy's not a complete tool.
No promises.
No. No, definitely look forward to the conversation.
But dude, we just kind of got off before we got on camera. Sorry, feeling a little bit under weather. In that post comp window, the bugs are hitting you. Feeling a bit flat. How we doing?
Yeah, all the things. You got the travel and you got the immune system's definitely not optimal. Plus I think that another factor that isn't always applicable to everyone, because I work with clients that have different lives outside of competing. So for some people, they can just take all their PTO days and take 3 week, take 2 weeks off, and recover and do all those things. It's like for a lot of us that have really busy businesses, or some people, even the more entrepreneurial type clients that have multiple businesses or have families and different things, like you really only have so much wiggle room there. And like I tell people, it's like, sure, I can not do something for a few days, but like it's gonna come back to me on the other side. You kind of pick your poison, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So so obviously coming back, more inquiries and stuff. So it's good for business.
Yeah.
That's always a positive. But it's like you're getting the inquiries and my brain's like, all right, yep, let's sort through this. Let's do one thing at a time. But like I was telling you prior, I just got hit with some kind of bug yesterday. I'm not really sure. Some kind of like viral, quick in and out thing. Hopefully, knock on wood. Seems like it's on its way out.
That's good to hear. Obviously, yeah. It's an interesting window of the old post comp. Everything and we'll no doubt get into this in more detail soon. But I really don't think people realize oftentimes how compromised the system and the body is in that window, and just what you can be susceptible to. I mean, I've got a couple of girls still coming out of their comps, and they're struggling to accept the hunger symptomology, the fatigue management, feeling exhausted still. It's like, oh, it's been 6 weeks. Like, cool, you just dieted for 30. You're probably going to feel pretty trash for a little while.
Well, and that's something that people don't consider because I think that people fail to realize that there's a lot of variables that go into recovering from a show. So first off, you're going to have this initial kind of dopamine and serotonin influx because a little bit of food, B, maybe you're excited about what's to come, whatever it might be. But I generally tell people that, I mean, that's very short-lived. I said, talk to me in 2 weeks when you don't have a goal anymore.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
all of that crashes back down because I promise you that your central nervous system, your adrenal function, your neurochemistry is not recovered. That's very
Yep.
temporary little hit
Yep.
that you're getting. And in a week or two, when all that settles down, you are going to be like, oh my God,
Yep.
what has just happened?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then that's where things really start.
Yeah.
That's where we're getting into hormonal recovery and so on and so forth. And that doesn't even take into account looking at like the imbalances in leptin and ghrelin and the weird hunger signaling that you're experiencing, the I'm physically full, but I'm psychologically hungry
Yep.
still, and why everyone thinks they're going to do okay post show and hardly anyone does. Why people are so susceptible to binge eating post show, because essentially your body's telling you, please get fatter.
Yes.
Would you just get fat as fast as possible? So it's
Yes.
going to keep throwing you this hunger signaling, and it's not even really calorically related. I mean, you could go binge
Hmm.
and still be hungry,
Yeah.
because until you kind of reach like a body fat homeostasis again, it's not going to go away.
Yeah, one of the things that I give some of my mentor clients, so mentorees, sorry, um, is for have them read the Minnesota starvation experiment and just do a little bit of research on starvation during World War II, more so for the perspective of understanding what post comp can actually be like. Because you get to that window where it's like you have those clients, you have those what would be inmates, prisoners of war, and they had to restrict them on the intake because they would eat themselves sick. They had to stop them from getting the food. They had to stop them from consuming, because once they started, it was like a ravenous, wolf. They just weren't going to stop eating. And obviously, at that certain point, like with enough food and a fast enough consumption time, they were concerned with interior tearing, breaking the intestines, basically the body just blowing itself up, and all of the things that come from that. And like this is no different. We're no different post comp to that sort of experience. You've done essentially, for much less of a lack of a better way, it's the same thing. You've starved yourself 20, 30 weeks, the extremes of, body composition we get to. And then you just all of a sudden like, well, no more goal, go do what I want. And there's no more barriers to that consumption. It's like we've got to be a little bit more cautious of our clients, and even ourselves as athletes. That post-com window is just like you are primed more so environmentally, psychosocially than you are physiologically to just eat.
Yeah. And you cite that. You can also kind of look at like refeeding syndrome with eating disorders, and
Mm.
how we see, essentially it all correlates, and it's just the fact that your body's just trying to get fat,
Yeah.
right? And we see, I mean, body fat overshooting, where we're actually like overshooting previous set points, not only in weight but like amount of adipose cells and like there's all kinds of crazy stuff that happens. I know there was and there might be more than that now. It was probably back 2016, 17, somewhere in there. They did some case study work and some actually controlled studies with post contest. And this was with male pro natural bodybuilders at the time. I think it was some guys in the US, a couple of them that I know. Like I think Dr. Peter Fitchin was part of it, who I've done a little bit with. But anyhow, long story short, they measured all the typical lab markers. So you see
Mhm.
testosterone recovery and all the immune markers and stuff, but they actually started looking at leptin and ghrelin. They had
Mhm.
ability to kind of measure stuff that we just don't measure as
Yeah.
coaches, right?
Yep.
And long story short, to kind of sum it up, they were seeing something in the vicinity of four to six, and usually closer to 6 months to fully recover every marker.
Hmm.
And keep in mind, these are males,
Yep.
and these are pro natural bodybuilders. And the reason I'm saying that's because I would venture to say that they're relatively calculated
Yes.
people,
Yes.
right? So we could assume that they were probably doing things right
Yeah. Yeah.
for the most part.
Yeah.
And now throw a female in there that's
Yep.
never competed before.
Yep. First timer.
I mean, dude.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you know, so then you take this, I compete in December and I want to do the same show again next December. I'm like, all right, so you've got like 3 months of
of a
actual
productive growth
recovery
phase.
in there. If
Yeah,
you're lucky, you have
yeah,
maybe 3 months in there where you're actually recovered and able to perform optimally and put on any tissue. And what's going to happen in 3 months? Like
yeah.
nothing.
I've gained zero point 0.5 kilograms of tissue.
Right. So
But, mate, yeah, but like I said, the conversation here could steer towards post comp as just a health phase for health conversation for 6 hours. But what I want to get to is, and this is going to be kind of like a great preface to the rest of the conversation, is you are now punching 16 years in the game. Me and you had this a quick back and forth on Instagram just the other day. We're making a joke about it. Um, that a lot of the time, by people would have got to your point of career in competing, would have pulled out, or they would have quit, or they would no longer be competing. It's not for them, or politics, judges, yada yada. I want to know about the backstory, the thing that got you to bodybuilding as someone that can endure 16 years of competing. Because a lot of the time, one of the things I'm starting to identify, and I'd be curious to see where you fit in that, is there's a big difference to me in bodybuilders with those who have a sporting or competitive athletic background and those who don't. And not to say that no one can do it that hasn't been an athlete before, but there's a degree of awareness that I'm finding in my athletes in the separation of the two, I guess, amongst, you call it subpopulations. And I'm curious what that story is like before you get into bodybuilding and what leads to 16 years of competing, because that's a long career of someone who's purely working on physique development and the philosophies and the life lessons that would have come from that to be kind of where you are.
man, it's a great question because I'm actually realizing more and more that I'm kind of an anomaly at this point.
Love it. Good.
Well,
Love it normally.
I mean, not, and I don't mean that in any other way that just statistically, it's just not that common,
Yes.
right? I think, like you said, by this point, one of two things would have happened. You would have quit because that's not an unreasonable thing to do. I mean, frankly, like honestly, my perspective on that a long time ago, or years ago, might have been like, "Oh, you're just weak, whatever." But realistically, when you go from my first competition, I was 18 years old,
Mm-hmm.
and now I have a fiance and two kids.
Mm-hmm. Ah,
I mean,
shit.
that's just like a whole, just that in and of itself, and I have a business and I have some like separate, little ventures and stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
so just that alone
Mm-hmm.
is enough to steer your interest away from this. But what I will say, I think for me is that the first thing is I've changed so many things over the years to where I've actually let go of a lot of like the hyperfixation on so many aspects of bodybuilding.
Mm-hmm.
I pretty much tell people that, like, for example, if I had to go on a trip this weekend,
Mm-hmm.
Friday to Sunday, and I had no food,
Mm-hmm.
I could be 95% with no food
Mm-hmm.
and not even know where a gym's at. I
Yeah.
could literally just figure it out as I went because I don't really have, like, I'm not worried, okay, I don't eat at the same time, big deal. I can track, I can figure these things out. In the US, especially, we have so much access to stuff. I can
Yeah.
Instacart shit to my hotel.
Yep.
I can, like, dude, it's not hard.
Yeah.
It takes a little bit of, at least for me, because I've done it so many times. So, but it takes the experience, but I can pretty much bodybuild in any environment
Yeah.
very effectively.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, at the very end of prep, of course, that's going to be more difficult because my caloric resources are, minimal.
Yeah.
I have to have there's more time allocation to like getting my expenditure in and all that stuff, and my recovery, my energy's not good.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but outside of that very small window, I can pretty much bodybuild. It's software in my brain, dude. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not. That's what I tell people is the amount that I actually think about bodybuilding is so little,
Yeah.
dude. I mean, it's so little. I will look at what I'm doing, assess the effectiveness, let that work, I will reassess periodically. I make a change and I'll go. There's nothing else to think about.
Mhm.
I mean, because I have had, I prep myself for shows. I've worked with people for shows. Like my last couple shows, um, I had a guy, Cliff Wilson's good friend of mine. He came in about 6 weeks out from my qualifier show in 2022 and again this year. I prep myself the rest of the way through. I do all my own off seasons. I've done several of my own preps. But but the way that I've been able to do that is because I've just let go of so many
Yeah.
things that people generally hyperfixate on. And I'm talking clear down to like variable tracking. I've kind of figured out like these are the variables that my body tends to struggle with. I will
Mhm.
use these. These are the ones that don't really matter that much to me,
Mhm.
right? And so I'm like, this is useless minutia. Get rid of it, right? This is useless, like hyperfixation, useless mental stress. So like, let's
Yeah.
get rid of it. So I've fine tuned everything down so much to where it takes minimal thought. I mean, with my family, um, both boys are teenagers. They're involved in a lot of activities. I go to basically everything. I mean, in prep, they had a the oldest had a choir concert or had a choir concert on Monday, like 5 days out from the show, and I was there watching for 2 hours, and yeah, I'm tired and stuff, but like, dude, my plan's not doing it. I'm sitting and watching,
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
just trying to, and for me, if anything, it's a good thing, right? I'm engaging in something that's not me sitting at home watching the clock.
Yeah, yeah. You're not fixating on the when's the next meal? I'm going to do this. I'm just going to sit here and be in my hunger until get to eat again.
And that kind of brings me up to my next point, and I think I've learned that this is probably a key to longevity for people is that, and I've come to appreciate this a lot more, especially in the last couple years with having more family activities, is if you don't have any interests outside of bodybuilding,
Mhm.
you're going to burn out.
Yeah,
I'm telling you right now, you may not think that if you're 3 years in or even 5 years in,
yeah,
but as you get older and as you do this longer, you will absolutely burn out if you do not have any hobbies or interests.
yeah,
These things don't make you less hardcore. They don't make
yeah,
you any
yeah.
less effective as a competitor. So that's been huge for me is I've had to prioritize, or I've made it, taken it, put effort into prioritizing things that I enjoy doing.
Mhm.
And even though I'm very busy with business and with family, I have a schedule. I
Mhm.
write it in my schedule. Like these are non-negotiable things that I want to do that I derive joy from that aren't bodybuilding related. And that's been huge for me. So like something my clients hear me preach, especially my younger
Yeah,
clients,
yeah,
I'm like, hey, what do you like to do? They're like, oh, I don't know. I'm like, well, that's a problem.
yeah.
Like that's well, let's start there. You know,
Let's figure something out.
I mean, there's got to be something else you enjoy. I mean, bodybuilding, how long does it take you to eat a meal?
Yeah,
Like, I don't know, 10 minutes. I'm like, all right, what are you doing? I'm like, how long are you at work? I'm like, what are you doing the rest of the time? Like watching bodybuilding YouTube videos. I'm like, okay, that's fine. But are you going to do that for 15 years? Because I'm telling you that you're not going to give a shit about those bodybuilding YouTube videos in 15 years.
correct.
So it's like all these things, it's a maturity process, really. Like all
Yeah,
these things I think have allowed me to continue to do it. And I'm crazy, I'm a little crazy. So there's that. Um, but I'll also say, and I'll kind of leave you with this. It was probably up until a few years ago, I didn't really know that it was realistic for me to achieve something like an IFBB pro status or anything
Mhm.
like that. And I kind of like I did nationals in 22 and I got seventh. I actually did worse this year. I looked a lot
I
better
was
and I
gonna,
did
yeah,
worse.
I saw your post
Yeah.
about
Um, but I do think that I can get it.
that. Mhm.
Um, and for me, it's probably even going to be in masters because I'll be 35 next year and I don't care. Like people like, I don't want to get the open. I'm like, bro, I don't give a shit. I'll take the Masters. But regardless, now I kind of am getting to the point in my career where I think that's probably my end game.
Mhm.
I'm gonna slap that shit up in my bio on Instagram and be like,
Put it in the old Insta handle.
peace. I'm done.
And then never compete again.
And then I'll see you guys later. You know, but but it is kind of a weird thing now because now I'm at this point where I'm like, man, that probably is it, you know?
Mm.
I mean, I'll be 35 if I don't have that shit by the time I'm 40, dude. I don't know, man. You know what I mean?
Those beers are looking real good.
I'm like, I don't know. So we're on the back end for sure.
But I think like you've touched on something that, and I put this into our email. There's a word that Danny had used to me. Me and Danny talk quite heavily on psychological components, personality, philosophy, things like that, because it's something that she's exploring as well with herself as such a high level athlete. And you've kind of touched on there. It wasn't until only a couple of years ago where you've discussed or even, I guess, contemplated on the thought of going pro. One of the problems that I'm seeing nowadays, and I'm not speaking from I'm a pro, I'm nowhere near pro. I, won one of my divisions in my last season and still have to work my way up, even getting through the amateurs. But a lot of people I'm finding are coming into this game gung ho about the idea of getting pro status straight off the bat. My first year I need to be Nick Walker and come in, absolutely slaying it, win the New York Pro, go on to this, and then I'm going to be a Mr. Olympia contender in my first year. And it's like they're rushing the process, trying to bypass the game and get to the end point, missing all the lessons and the experiences and maturity that you've just been talking about for 20 minutes is, kind of part of the ritual of experiencing the bodybuilding growth side of things. And we're seeing, or I am seeing young cats come through that are trying to bypass that, rush into it, think they're going to elevate past everyone else. And, if they don't get it in their first year or second year, their coach is terrible. To me, you've just described what is more important about bodybuilding. That is the lessons, the evolution, the maturity, the growth that happens along that journey. And in amongst that, the person you become along the way, what Danny called autotelicity, meaning more like auto Greek self and telicity like telos. So like you're describing purpose and reason behind your career that is beyond just I need to get my pro card. Like yeah, you compete because you want to win the show and you want to win your pro card, but you've just described you were only 2 years ago starting to realize like, hey, this is something I could do and get the pro status for. So for the 14 years before that, what were you feeling where you're like, I just love this, I want to do this, I want to grow, and how do I actually maximize what this gives me in life?
Part of it is I was fortunate enough to start and it's so I was fortunate enough to miss Instagram at the beginning. I'll say this. I think that's very important to point out because the mindset was definitely different. I wasn't on, I think Instagram started around 2010. I don't even think I had one until 12 or 13.
Mhm.
And my first competition was 2009.
Mhm.
So for reference, so I was on the forums, I was on like the RX muscle forums and
Yep.
maybe like muscular development or
Yep.
intense muscle, whatever, the stuff that people were on back then.
Yep.
So I do think that is a factor just because the way I was introduced to the sport, if I don't know if people want to call it a sport, whatever it is, um, was a little bit different. And I came from, you mentioned competitive background. I was a wrestler, so there's a lot of I'm sure there's a lot of
Very
wrestlers
modern
in
wrestling,
bodybuilding.
as in your type of
Yeah,
wrestling, not
yeah,
fake wrestling.
yeah. In the US, so folk style wrestling. But I like I said, I feel fortunate that I was introduced to it in that way. I do think that is a big factor. I kind of sympathize with people to a point, and I understand that their introduction to this is just totally different than
Yep.
than how I came into it. Um, and so that's probably one of the bigger factors. But along the way, I mean, for me is just I am just somebody that strives for improvement.
Mhm.
And that's just always been, I think that you had commented on one of my progress photos or something pre-show. And I was like, dude, I've won 5 overalls in the NPC and open bodybuilding and stuff. It's like, I'm still trying to crack top 5 over here, you know? And for a lot of people, that's probably hard to wrap their head around
Yeah.
because a lot of people, they're getting their first nationally qualified, whatever the show is. And they're like, I'm ready.
Yeah.
I'm going to do the thing. Right. And yes, there are outliers. It is division specific. I firmly stand by, like, in the US, light heavyweight and heavyweight open bodybuilding are basically the pinnacle. I mean, that is the hardest,
Yeah.
deepest divisions you can be in by
Hmm.
far. I'm not knocking anyone. I'm just saying, like, go look at nationals. We had
Yeah.
38 guys in light heavy, and the next closest was 18 in any division, or 19, something like that. So that's not really that's statistically that is correct.
Yeah.
um so part of the thing there is it is difficult. It's just hard.
Hmm.
Maybe in a different category it'd be a little bit different. I've not really had a whole lot of interest in doing, like, I would entertain the idea of classic physique. I'm far above the weight cap now, so my
Yeah.
that ship sailed for me. I
Yeah.
can't even make the
Yeah.
weight anymore. So it's like whatever. um
Yeah.
but yeah, I just think my introduction to it was a big part of it. And I really have just always strived to improve, 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 improve. And that was without, maybe I'm kind of the odd man out there, but I never really had like, this is exactly what I want to accomplish. It's just like,
Hmm.
I want to do better than the last time.
Yeah.
And each time, and I was disappointed, I would be disappointed if I didn't, but I can look back historically and think I got better every single show.
Hmm.
And I think that's something to celebrate,
Yeah.
you know, and that's not without setbacks. I mean, I had, you know, plenty of my own setbacks, whether it was injuries or beating myself up, making mistakes,
Yeah.
having to deal with ramifications of that. Um, Luckily, I learned from that. There's a lot of stuff I've been able to apply to my own coaching
Yeah.
from, screwing myself up over the years.
Do as I say.
But
Do I
uh,
do.
but yeah, I mean, that's just always been the goal. And I also fully realize that there's always a chance that I won't achieve
Hmm.
that goal. And if that's what happens, then I guess, I mean, life goes on,
Yeah.
you
But
know.
that's where it's so important, I think, to have. And it's something I try and encourage my clients to do. It's why I never give a first timer the option of PDs, um, before they've shown genuine love to the game and what it can do for them. Like, I call it kind of like earning that next level. Because to me, like, if you're first time coming in, dick swinging, you're like, yeah, I want to do this. I'm going to go pro and I want to do IPV straight off the bat. Cool. Are you getting someone that's lived this lifestyle for 3 to 6 months, 12 months, over a year, or are you just someone who's seen like Chris Bumstead's YouTube channel? Which, credit to him, there's no dissing, he's done nothing wrong, but there's people who get caught up in watching YouTube channels now where they think like this is how all preps have to go, is the elite status of dosage, training, lifestyle, implementation. That's it. That's their only exposure to this game. And then all of a sudden they want to jump on every supplement and stack design under the sun. Like, yeah, I'm going pro in 12 months. It's like, to me, I need to see that my philosophy as a coach, that you have earned the right to do that by proving you love what we're doing. Because if you go into this with the wrong approach, the wrong philosophy, the wrong telos, if you will, then you are setting yourself up for a post window that will almost ruin your life. Like, I've seen it time and time again, and people that have destroyed their lives, their health. Post comp, there's every metric under the sun is destroyed. Blood panels are
Mental.
horrible. Mentally, they are just psychologically damaged. Like, beyond just food cravings, just beyond even the food side of things, but going to the psychological buildups of their relationships, the things that they've lost along the way. People are willing to lose jobs, careers, relationships, friendships over something they think that they will get their first year. And then all of a sudden they're depressed because, well, I worked really hard and I didn't win. It's like, yeah, well, everyone else worked hard. The prerequisite to entry you get on stage is work hard. That's just like a bare minimum. And you're like, yeah, well, I did that, so I should have won. And so to me, what you just described there is almost the perfect way that some should approach bodybuilding, and that is the journey of growth over time and seeing what that produces for you. And if it's anything more than that, anything less than that, sorry, you're looking more at an outcome based goal rather than a process performance based goal, and you're really setting yourself up for failure because it's one of the few sports where you objectively cannot control what the judges want on the day. You can objectively control your best position to be there, but in regards to how that outcome finishes up, you have next to no control over how you stack next to who turns up, what the judges are looking for, if the criteria has changed this year slightly, if the head judges are different to what it was last nationals. All those variables will impact the outcome. You can't control. So if we're going into this with like I need to win first show, or I need to be in the first call outs, or I need to be third place, and like you said, my first season, there was 19 and 21 guys in under 90s over here, which is light heavyweights. I was 81 kilos and I got seventh, and I was like, "Fuck, that is awesome!" Like I didn't even expect to get top 10 here against
Yeah.
19 guys, and I was on the bottom end of the run, and I'm like, "Oh, that's pretty good. I can work with that. Like, I actually have something to show here." And I was tiny, but it was like, oh, that my if all that I have is my structure and my shape, it obviously did pretty well. So like, but if you can't look at it like that and then go, well, where do I go next? Like, there's no point doing it, in my opinion.
Yeah, and realistically, from a genetic standpoint, if the thing about genetics is if you sincerely have good genetics, you can basically do everything wrong and still be pretty good.
Yeah,
Like you're gonna know,
yeah, yeah,
like if you do anything with any amount of, and I say any amount of effort for a couple years, you're basically gonna know
yeah,
if you have good genetics or not.
yeah,
And I I realized, I don't know where it was, but I just realized somewhere in that process of kind of where I fell
yeah,
in that genetic tier. I was like, hey, these are the things I'm good at. It's like I have mentally, I'm strong. I have some structural things that are good. I have this mental fortitude to get in condition. I can do all these things. So I'm like, you know, if I do this long enough and I play my cards right, there's a lot of people in 5 years that aren't going to be here anymore, and another 5 years that aren't going to be here anymore. I'm gonna pass people.
yeah,
I'm gonna keep passing people,
yeah,
right? And inevitably that happened, but and more new people show up
yeah,
that are
yeah,
good. But if you never come, I mean, if you can't just come to terms with that, and then man, you're gonna have a rough way to go.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, you're in for a very rude awakening when you get on that stage every single time and you continue to lose. I just think also it's a little bit telling of how you view life. One of the key traits, like we do a personality assessment, especially with my athletes, that when they start up, and we look for traits in the big five and try and see, try to build some trends and see how they start off. Like traits aren't completely fixed. They're slightly malleable. They're things we can work on over time. But one of the traits that I really notice is the ones who I can see probably won't do well, won't last too well, or at least last too long, is their inability to develop or engage in delayed gratification. If they simply cannot sacrifice what they want now for what they want in the future, which if they come telling me they want to be an IFBB pro, they want to work on their first season, they want to get towards their first show. If I don't see in your behaviors you're able to sacrifice just some things that you want now for where you want to go in the future, it is hard pressed for me to believe that you're going to work anywhere near being a top tier amateur, let alone get a pro card. I don't know if you've seen something like that similar to yourself with the clients that you've worked with, but by the sounds of it, you have that very similar approach in, well, a very delayed gratification. Like you said, you're 16 years into this and you're still trying to itch out the wins in every season, regardless of whether that's a better placing or a better look, better appearance, better condition, fuller shape, whatever it might be. But the ability to delay gratification and see like this is what I want to do long term, I'm willing to give up these things. If I don't see that in an athlete, I'm hard pressed to believe that they're going to get on stage and do well. And not to do well
It's
as in their placing, but do well in the game of bodybuilding.
Yes, because there are definitely people that, again, like if you do have good to great genetics, you're going to do pretty well even if you lack those traits.
Yes.
Is your shelf life in the sport going to be very long? What I would say is this: you're going to do well, but you're not going to reach your potential,
Yes.
right? You're still going to fall very far short of what you could be,
Yeah.
right? And that's really what we're trying to do as coaches and trying to do as athletes is we're trying to maximize our potential,
Yeah.
whatever that might be, right? Um, and I do something very similar, and I think my initial assessment and conversations with clients has changed so much over the years where, once you know how to make food, eat
Mhm.
food, weigh food, train,
Yeah.
those things we can easily manipulate as a coach. There's going to be a lot of redundancy there. Of course, we're going to adjust them. We're going to adapt them to the person, whether it's your mechanics or nutrition or whatever it is, right?
Mhm.
But it's really once you kind of have those things down, there's likely going to be some psychological gaps that are going to be that we need to hone in on a
Mhm.
lot more heavily than the actual like physical boxes that we're
Yes.
checking all the time. So I think this kind of throws people off sometimes when we do our initial
Mhm.
consultations and they go through all this information. I'm like, yeah, you know how to do all this shit. Let's talk about the stuff that's going to hold you back. And they're like,
Yeah.
what? I'm like, yeah, listen, I know you can eat. It's fine. you know, I'm like, these are the things. And then we spend 20, 30 minutes talking about, like all of these other things that are completely unrelated to nutrition. I'm
Yeah.
like, dude, I'm going to handle that stuff. That's why you pay me. Don't worry about it. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, like you don't even have to think about that stuff. I got it. Um, and we spend this time talking about, I'm at the point now where I just throw everything on the table right from the
Mhm.
beginning. You know what? And sometimes luckily, my business is very established. So it's like I don't take tons and tons of new clients because I just
Yeah.
don't have a lot of space. So you
Yeah.
know what? If they don't like what I have to say, I guess whatever, you know? But I'm pretty much going to throw all that stuff right out on the table at the beginning and be like, here's the things I think that will pose an obstacle for us. So
Mhm.
let's talk about that.
Mhm.
I don't expect personality traits to be like instantaneously changed. That's not how human
Yeah.
psychology works.
Yeah.
You can't just flip the script on people,
Yes.
but you have to at least build awareness to even attempt to make a change because generally people just aren't even aware of what these pitfalls are. So you got to start there at least. And I'm guilty of that. I mean, I've had plenty of my own self-discovery over the years of things that have held me back. Awareness is hard. There's some ego death there, You're
Mhm.
like, shit, dude. Man, I really am self-sabotaging in
Yep.
this way or this way. So those things are hard to hear sometimes, and I work with like a lot of functional health cases and hormones and GI and things as well.
Yep.
And unfortunately, a lot of the people, have these conversations. They're like, so what you're telling me is I did this to myself. I'm like,
There you go.
yeah.
We've hit
I
it.
said, hey, dude, it's not personal. I'm not mad at you. I'm just
Yeah.
saying, like, the reason that you're here is because of usually because of these personality traits that have driven you here. It's like an addict, if
Mhm.
someone's addicted to, let's take something really extreme like an opiate addiction,
Mhm.
like heroin or something very extreme. There's a point in there where that that's hurting you, but you keep
Yeah.
doing it because
Yeah.
you're now that's a little different because there's also there's a physiological and a psychological addiction,
Yeah.
but we can still draw parallels there because usually if I talk about it a little bit, they do realize that a lot of what they're doing is hurting them
Yeah.
and holding them back, but they're very afraid to change it,
Yeah.
you
Typical.
know. And I get it, man. Like I understand, but it still does. I mean, it's still a problem.
Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
got to talk about it.
And that's a I think a trait in coaching us as coaches. I think it gets missed a lot by. This isn't a dig at anyone in particular. It's unique I've kind of noticed it's very unique in the realm of bodybuilding, in the coaching space, is people are people are reluctant to understand that coaching is more than giving X's and O's and macros, or food selection. Looking at, like you sort of established there, it's so easy if you get the right conscientious type A personality and a slight degree of neuroticism. It's very easy to get someone to tick boxes consistently and just be obsessed with trying to get lean. That is not hard coaching. That's just simply a very basic template of a successful athlete in our game. Maybe a little bit of degree of body image issues, a little bit of like anxiety around not looking good on stage, so therefore they're going to put in the effort. Conscientiousness, they're very task orientated, they're very driven, they can tick the boxes and be industrious. That's not a hard coaching thing. But where it goes wrong is once that deviates from that template, and you all of a sudden have to start working on that person, as an individual, not just a robot or a box or a car that they can just mechanically twist and screw or play with a bolt. And I think that's where a lot of the coaching game can go astray, is that we aren't perceiving the individual as a human being and realizing that there's a psychosomatic relationship that needs to be considered. And a lot of the time it's like, oh, well, just remove that food from your house, or just take that food off your plate, or just don't eat it. It's like, if that was the answer to having someone psychologically avoid the consequences of starvation, we'd all just not be, we would all be bodybuilders, we'd all be lean. That's not coaching. That's not how you guide someone or move someone through those problems. And I think that's a part where we kind of have to come to more of a realization. It's something that, my degree is in clinical psychology. That's what makes this fun to me. It's like understanding that combined trifecta of nutrition, physiology, and psychology helps you to basically complete the athlete. Like, these are the things that you're missing, like the getting lean, the X and O's, the gradual calorie deficit, the increase in expenditure, the training enough to maintain tissue. That's, to a degree, becomes the easy part. But we need to figure out, before I start my clients in prep, what's your relationship like with your girlfriend or your husband, or your fiance, or what's it like with your family? What's your cultural background? Trying to prep someone who's Greek or Mediterranean over Christmas, good luck. That's fucking, that's going to take some work. What are your boundaries like with siblings and best friends and social groups? Where do you spend time? Where are you someone that hangs out? Like, as you said before, what do you do that you enjoy that's besides bodybuilding? What do you do for day? Like, all these variables come into play. Where I'm like, if I don't see those as successful, or like that you can tick those off, I'm not going to prep you, because I know for a fact now, with that many clients that I've worked with, that those psychosocial variables will impact the likelihood of us completing this prep, or at least to the degree where you're at your best. And that's got nothing to do with calories, or your total macronutrient breakdown, or how many steps you're doing. That's a lot more to do with, like, what is the cultural heritage you grew up with, because a Greek nonna does not give a shit that you are trying to get lean. In fact, she'll probably try and force feed you. The amount of women, males and females, that I've had with some sort of Mediterranean background, and they're just like, when I tell Nonna that I'm dieting, she hates me with a passion, and she will start loading up my plate with extra food. I'm like, it's a cultural thing you have to work through. We have to understand that as coaches.
Yeah, and even if you do accomplish the task of the prep, what it's done to you psychologically, the aftermath of that is going to be far worse than anything you can even
Yeah.
perceive, you
Yes.
know. Um, because a lot of time that initial newness of the prep can kind of get you through
Yeah.
to
Like
that,
white
the
line
first
fever.
time, like it's new, I'm excited, I
Yeah.
can kind of ignore a lot of these
David
things, I can,
Goggins.
yeah, do the stuff, whatever. But I'm telling you what, the onslaught that is going to ensue when you're done is going to be like nothing you've ever
Yeah.
experienced in your life. And I had made a post recently about, people blaming bodybuilding for, for their issues,
I think I
and
still
I
have
kind of,
those too.
yeah, like I think when people read that, I think they mostly were thinking about like physiological hormones and,
Yeah.
things like that. But psychologically is
Yeah.
as important, if not more important, for a lot of those, a lot of those cases. And unfortunately, you kind of mentioned it earlier. People with people with type A neurotic tendencies, perfectionism, they do gravitate towards this because it's easy.
Yeah.
It's an easy transition to make. I am that guy. Like I've done years of therapy over my lifetime. My the underlying theme is kind of this like perfectionist tendencies and stuff. And in fact, I will say that the the more that I let go of a lot of those traits, the better off I become, or I should say more so like understanding which pieces to retain
Hmm.
and which pieces to not retain anymore, and how to kind of use a lot of that to my advantage.
Yes.
Um, but yeah, it's not really, and it's not even a matter of if there's going to be problems. It's a matter of
Yeah.
when. Like if you don't address these things, it's
Yeah.
going to happen.
And that's
It's
what
inevitable.
but one of the things I love about bodybuilding is that, like you just talked about there, it forces you to explore yourself and reach things that you did not. You have to kind of, at certain points in the prep, you're going to dig down and find some things in yourself that is either going to be fuel for you to get through it. One of my favorite things to try and explain to people is filtration and repression requires cognitive effort. So if you are depriving yourself of fuel, oxygen and glycogen no longer running to the brain as effectively, we're becoming exhausted and fatigued. The prefrontal cortex doesn't work anymore to a degree. That cognitive functionality and capability really starts to decline. And the first things that go with that is your ability to consistently repress, to filtrate things and kind of keep things down and bottle up. And so eventually these things start to seep out, and eventually they even just explode out. I've seen breakdowns. I've had clients that, make drastic life changes, or all of a sudden their entire personality changed, and realized that who they were beforehand and who they were afterwards, it was more of a true reflection of who was underneath because they hadn't done the work. And the sport brought it out in them because it was kind of time for it to be released. Not because the sport made them a bad person, but because the act of doing something so hard forced them to, they didn't have the ability to let go, to retain it or restrain it, and so it came out. And that basically forced them to reflect on or realize, like, this was happening, or this is who I am, or this has been here the whole time. And that to me is one of my favorite things about bodybuilding, is that it teaches you about yourself in ways that other sports that I've done, like I've done a lot of sports big here in Australia, especially in childhood. I've done a lot of sports, played at decent levels, and nothing forced me to grow and develop and expand, evolve more than bodybuilding did. I've only done 3 seasons. I've been in it for going on 6 years now, 5 years now, and each time has taken me to a different place, to a different level, to a different position. I mean, the first time I ever competed was 8 months after my father passed away. And to me, the mission wasn't to get on stage and win. It was simply more of a, can I prove to myself that I can do something this hard when everything else is going wrong? When everything else is outside of my control, when everything else is, I've been that guy who's talked about competing before, and I'm going to do this and one day be a bodybuilder. Is this actually something that I can do? When everything else is going to shit and nothing else is working and my life's collapsing, is this something that I can control and take care of and build off and learn from? And it just forced me to understand myself better. And I think that's one of the things that makes bodybuilding so powerful, is if you do it for the right reasons. And it's probably like an underlying theme of this conversation so far is, it's a great thing, but if you do it for the wrong reasons, it can be detrimental. If you do the great thing for great reasons, it can make your life better.
Yeah, I think that I like every time I would say every time I prep, but I think probably any time that I get put in a really uncomfortable situation. So you could draw, it could be other things like an injury or something, something that, but prep is a great example because prep's kind of the pinnacle of discomfort, I would say,
Yeah.
for a lot of people. I like to take mental note of things that I feel are gaps that I can improve on, because they
Yeah.
don't necessarily come out when I'm comfortable.
Yeah.
Right. So like every time I do this, I can learn one or two things, and something that I can improve on just a little bit,
Yeah.
maybe during the times where I am a little bit more comfortable.
Mhm.
Um, so there's always a lot of self-realization process that goes
Yeah.
into that. And I think if you're not doing that, it is a missed opportunity.
Mhm.
But again, it could be during other instances too. It could be during a really stressful time with your family or a relationship, or like I said, you have a setback, anything that really puts you in a very uncomfortable
Uh-huh.
position where you feel that you don't have control of something. There's always something to learn there. And I think that's a great opportunity to take some notes, realize like these are things that I can improve on, and then execute that. So having done this now for lots of lots of preps, I've of course I've of course unlocked all kinds of different layers, if you will,
Yeah.
that maybe I wouldn't have seen otherwise had I just stayed in this level, stayed in this comfortable zone. And you hear people talk about that. You hear people that aren't bodybuilders talk about that. Like, yes, you need to become uncomfortable. That's how you learn. That's how, and there's a lot of maybe the way that they present it is not totally accurate or understandable, but there is a lot of merit in that,
Yeah.
but here's where that becomes pretty convoluted because I think that a lot of people in this space they come to me or they come to you or they come to anyone or they talk on social media and they say I'm comfortable being uncomfortable. So what they're really saying is I can do all these hard things, but when I tell them to stop doing the hard things because
Yeah.
they need
Yeah.
a rest,
Yeah.
I'm like, nah, now you're uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I told you to rest. I said you were perfectly comfortable beating the hell out of yourself. You were
Yeah.
fine doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it physically was difficult and you were tired, but you were actually much more comfortable doing that because it's
Yep.
familiar to you and you felt like it had a purpose. But when I tell you that you need to chill out,
Yep.
now you're actually uncomfortable. They're like, "Oh my God." I said because physically resting is about the easiest thing you can do. You're not doing anything.
Yep.
You know, Taking a day off from the gym is not physically difficult, but I'm actually putting you in a position where you're uncomfortable. So I always find that interesting when they're like, I can be uncomfortable. I'm like, can you?
Yeah.
Are you sure? Because
Yeah.
if I tell you to do something that you don't like, are you going to be able to do it? So I always kind of find that interesting. And I've experienced that, dude, I want to do what I want to do. And when I
Hmm.
can't do what I want to do, that is uncomfortable. But it's also a necessary part of that process. So I think that for a lot of people that don't have a lot of experience, the perceived level of discomfort from something like resting or an injury or setback is much greater. And the longer you do it, the easier, I mean, the easier it gets. What used to be a 10 is now a 2 on
Yeah.
that scale. It's just like competing, man, or it's just like time. You know, if I were to tell someone that's done one show, you need to take 2 years off to be
Mhm.
competitive at the level you want. 2 years is a lot to conceptualize when you've only been bodybuilding for 2 years.
Yeah.
But when you've been bodybuilding for 17 years or 18
Yeah.
years, you're like, all right, that's like tomorrow,
Oh yeah. Cool, man. Sweet.
whatever, because I've had a few people ask, like, what are you going to do your next show? I'm like, I don't know, probably another year and a half, 2 years. I mean, I mean, because
Yeah.
realistically, at this point, it's not like pounds of muscle are being
Yeah.
added to my frame. I mean, that takes a lot of time. The fact that I even can add more tissue competing that long is great in and of itself.
That in and of itself is even something that people need to consider, right? Is like the law of diminishing returns. The greater the amount of effort required to even gain marginal increments of what you've been doing, over time it just gets harder and harder to gain tissue. And that's something that even psychologically people need to be prepared for if you actually want to do this long term. Is like those initial gains you're going to make in your career aren't going to be there, aren't going to be as explosive, towards the back end when it's like, can you dedicate 2 years to gain 5 pounds of muscle? Whereas when you started, it was like, oh, I put on 20 pounds. It was a piece of piss. It was super easy. It wasn't really complicated. I just ate more, slept more, and did some training. Now it's like, how do I optimize everything to gain 5%? And you're like, even if it's at 5% over 2 years, you're like, holy shit, that's impressive. So I think that's something that, psychologically people need to be prepared for. But even going back to what you just said there, like where is one of the things like people that can find the love of doing things that are hard. If, like, as you said, if we're telling you to rest, to figure out, like, I call it my enjoyability and pleasure assessment with clients when I bring them on board. Is like, what's your perfect getaway look like? What does the day off look like? What do you do for fun? Yada yada. So I can know those things similar to yourself. If you can tell me that you can run a 40K marathon or a ultra marathon and you don't break a sweat, it doesn't bother you, and I tell you then to stop, I'm looking at you going like you got a degree of self self-defeat, suffering that you need to address because you're almost enjoying it, which to me becomes a problem. That's something psychological we need to look at because most people don't enjoy suffering and putting themselves through a degree of pain like that and going, oh, I'm hard because of it. I enjoy it. This makes me who I am. That should be a problem. So we're like just in that statement, we're discovering here there's psychological components of you that need to be looked at. And you put that into someone in a prep where I might tell you to do 5 days of training. Your program looks like XYZ, but also you don't tell me you're doing 2 extra days. You're training 7 days a week. You're doing an extra 5,000 steps above what I need you to do, and an extra 2 hours of cardio, taking extra drugs. Like that starts to spiral to a very unhealthy position that has really been uncovered because I told you to stop and you don't know how to. That is a psychological problem that we need to assess before you go anywhere near prepping.
Mm-hmm. I'll be the first to say I was never that guy that would do more than I was told, but I wanted to.
Yes.
But now I don't.
Yeah.
Dude, I don't like that shit.
Give me less if you can, please.
You know what I mean? Like I don't particularly, I mean, I'll do it, right? I'll do whatever. I mean, up to the point where it's like some ridiculously deleterious thing that I know better. But I mean, I'll do it, but I certainly don't enjoy feeling god awful.
Yeah.
But I will say that there was a time, I mean, there definitely was a time where I just purely associated suffering with
Yeah.
progress at any expense, no matter what. If I didn't feel that degree of suffering, I was not making progress.
Yeah.
And luckily for me, I grew out of that and learned and made mistakes and kind of, so now resting and doing less or changing things or adaptability. It's really just an adaptability thing. If you never come to the point where you are willing to be flexible and adaptable, that's another thing where again you're going to burn out.
Yeah.
You're not going to last because life's going to change. The way your body responds to stimulus is going to change. The amount that I can train and recover from has changed because my responsibilities as a person are different at this stage of my life than they were. A 21-year-old might not have a whole lot that they have to worry about.
Yeah.
Right. It might seem really difficult at the time. Maybe they're in university, maybe they're taking classes, maybe they're working a part-time job. It's a lot, but there's still like all these other things, bills, relationship, like there's all these other things that they don't really have to worry about yet.
Yeah. Not yet.
So you add all of that, you stack that allostatic load up.
Yeah.
And you realize, oh, now I'm 35, I'm 30, I'm 40, I'm 50, I'm whatever. I can't train 6 days a week anymore because I can't recover from it, So if you never learn those things, best case scenario is you don't make any progress. Worst case scenario is you backslide or quit.
Yeah.
And there was a point where I started having a lot of issues, just more stress related as far as nervous system, adrenals, leading to a lot of GI and hormones and things. And I had to make a choice. Luckily, I had some good people in my corner. I have a great doctor here in the U.S. who's very well known. You ever heard of Dr. Eric Serrano here in the U.S.?
Serrano, yeah. Everyone around me knows Serrano.
Yeah, Eric's a hoot. He's a trip. In person, he's such an interesting guy. But he was a great influence on me through a lot of those times. And I learned the hard way, but at least I listened. I'm glad that I did.
Yeah.
I'm glad that I listened, and I'm glad I figured it out. So yeah, my training load looks different than it used to. My everything looks different, but that's because I'm not in the same position in my life anymore.
Yeah. And does that kind of position you're in now, those experiences you've been through, I know what the answer would be for me. It's kind of one of the philosophies that I have as a coach. I look at, especially junior athletes going into bodybuilding, if they're younger, 18 to 25, I take kind of a pride in, I look at it as I need to be the coach that I needed when I was younger and be that person that was going to elevate me, teach me, mentor me, and make me a better person. Do you find that over that 16 years, those lessons you've learned, those experiences, those philosophies we've talked about, Do you find that's changed how you coach? Are you trying to instill those lessons into your clients, or you just let them naturally find those things? How does your career there's a lot of people that argue like you don't need to be a bodybuilder to be a bodybuilding coach, but I find some of those hands-on in the trenches experiences have led to my philosophies being better for my clients because I know the mistakes not to make. I've been there. I won't ask them to do anything that I wouldn't do. I wouldn't take myself to that level if I wouldn't do it. The chances of me asking them to do it is very very slim. Does that have you found that impact your ways of coaching, your philosophies, and the way you deal with your clients?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not gonna argue that there aren't people that are great coaches that don't compete.
Mm-hmm.
I but statistically it's a small number.
Mm-hmm.
I just think that, and I would say the ones that do that probably have a lot of indirect experience with,
Yeah.
they've at least paid attention
Yeah.
to those things with their clients. So somewhere in there, they've gained that experience,
Yeah.
right? Somehow.
Yeah.
Because, and I would go as far as to say that that's why, that's even why, if you are someone that maybe hasn't dealt with a lot of those difficulties, or you are like the upper echelon of genetics, you might not even relate to people
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
that level. Like you
I
might have
mean, it's pretty hard.
it's not right. And I'm not, again, like, dude, trust me, I would not be mad if I had those, some of those guys' genetics. It would probably, but I think the unfortunate truth or the fortunate reality there is I probably wouldn't be the same coach.
Yeah.
I would be a different bodybuilder. Um, I don't know if better is the word. I mean, I would be probably in a higher level,
Yeah.
but I don't know that it would make me, I don't know that I could coach in the fashion that I do had I not
Mhm.
had those experiences. And I would go as I would add an extra layer to that and say, had the experiences and fixed them,
Yeah.
worked on them,
Yeah.
took notice of them. Because there's plenty of people that have the experiences that don't actually make any improvements from them.
Yeah.
And that doesn't really help you either.
Yeah.
It's just like, a lot of people now, again, in kind of like that functional space, because I'm so heavily involved in that. And I hate even using that word anymore because it's been so bastardized, but we're going to call it that. Um, they talk about all these things. I'm like, you are all of these things. You've not actually worked to fix any of these things. And
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm
Like
not,
all those
I'm,
traits are still here.
yeah, I'm not knocking anyone that has to deal with obstacles. But at the same time, if you've not actually practiced what you've preached,
Yeah.
I mean, I think that probably reduces your validity a little bit.
Yeah. I find it kind of like it reduces your ability to like I find that degree of confidence and knowing when I speak to my client, like I've been through this adversity, I can empathize and put myself in your shoes. This is this is gonna this I know that this could work or like this is still possible because I've been here, I've been in this environment, I've been through this struggle, I've been through something similar. It can help build a little bit of confidence in them that hey, this guy is kind of like where I'm going to be in the future, and that's going to be something that I can look to as like a guiding light, as a beacon that I can follow that I know it's still possible. There's obviously there's supplementation that comes into things that may separate those divisions and what's possible for my client, but at least seeing that hey, I've been through maybe even worse struggles than you're talking about right now, and we still can get through the other side that's going to build a little bit of confidence in them. If it's that, hey, here's my starting point. I had horrible genetics. I was not the biggest guy. I was not heavy. I was not starting off at like, a super heavyweight category. And I got to this position. That's going to build a little bit of confidence in that client that like he knows what he's talking about or he's been there and been through the same mental hurdles or struggles or body image issues that I've been through. I think that to a degree at least builds a little bit of confidence in the client when we're working with them, the athlete, that can almost enhance their result because they're going to be a little bit harder, they're going to push a little bit harder, give a little bit more effort, that it's possible. Just having that bit of belief that the person that they're working with has kind of been there and they know it can be done.
Yeah, and that's why the further you get into your career and the more that you establish who you are and the more people see who you are and you build this reputation, you will just generally attract the types of people that are going to gravitate towards that. Like
Yes.
I just don't really attract, people talk like, man, I have all these clients that they just want to use like tons of drugs and this and that. I'm like, dude, I get that some, but I really don't get it. I really don't deal with a lot of those things too much
Yeah.
because people know what I'm about.
Yeah.
That's they kind of understand like who I am and what I'm about because I've been here for a long time. And
Mhm.
so you will attract that. And I think even when you're newer, it's very important with a lot of the coaches I mentor and stuff. I'm like, hey, you should be very conscious of who are you talking to when you're posting on social media and stuff. Don't be mad. Don't be mad if you're not getting the types of clients you want, if you're not putting out the types of, the type of content that you're trying to attract. Like that's your fault.
Yeah.
you
Exactly.
know, if every if you know it's like if you, and again, I'm not knocking anyone, but it's like if you're a female and you have all this great information, but all you're putting up is ass pics, it's like, I'm sorry. Like, what do you think you're going to attract? It's like, talk about something of substance. Like, what do you have to offer? Guys are the same way. If
Yeah.
if you're just talking about the only thing you talk about is outrageous drug cycles,
Yeah.
what do you think is going to come to your inbox?
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, I need a coach that does outrageous drug cycles.
Like that's what you're going to attract, man. You're going to attract the people that want the outrageous drug cycles. Like if you don't want to deal with that, pick and choose who you talk to.
This actually leads to a great segue to probably one of my last exploratory questions. We've talked pretty heavily on psychological aspects of coaching, bodybuilding, philosophies around what you can gain from bodybuilding, how good it can be. And I think that's probably a conversation people miss altogether is like how good bodybuilding can be outside of the sport, like not just where you place, but how good it can be in life development. But one of the things that you're really renowned for, one of the things you're heavily known for, is your GI work. And one of the things that we've talked quite heavily on is stress psychology, and there's a big component that I don't see a lot of people talk about. I'd love to know your take on it, and that is the interaction. Obviously, as we talked about before, the psychosomatic relationship and the way that the brain can influence the body influence the brain. The one of the things that I see quite a lot is when people are very heavily stressed, when people are very psychologically traumatized, struggling, going through a lot of problems, even through the depths of things like preps. There's a lot of orals that people put in place and that sort of thing that will disrupt the gut and digestion and that entire pathway. But how do you see the relationship between stress, digestion, the vagus nerve, in the way that that can interact with the stomach? Are you seeing that as a contributing factor to people that do have these digestive issues and these GI issues, whether it be in prep, out of prep, just general life? What do you see there as a relationship between the two?
You can even broaden that question because I think that when you're talking about GI, there's going to be so much interplay between hormone metabolism and pretty much all these systems. And um, I posted a testimonial one of my clients had made for me, a little video recently, and she illustrated it perfectly. So she was experiencing, she had a lot of trauma, right?
Mhm.
Previous stuff that just hadn't been dealt with, right?
Mhm.
And she talked to me about it up to a point, and again, some of the stuff's personal, so it's, I only dig to the degree that I feel is necessary.
Yeah.
But decided she was going to get into some intensive trauma therapy, starts exploring that. And when I tell you, I kid you not, first couple sessions kind of knocked her on her ass.
Yeah.
Like gained like 5 pounds, blew up, inflammation, right? She had this initial immune response,
Yeah.
this nervous system response, water retention, blah, blah, blah. Started to dig into it. So we had initially done some work to kind of work on her GI, and we got some good progress. But when she actually started working through this trauma, I kid you not, she dropped weight for 4 months straight with zero dietary changes. And this is somebody that I feel was very adherent.
Yeah.
People are like, oh, she wasn't following diet. I'm like, listen, guys, I have a pretty good radar for that stuff, I
Yeah.
feel. Um, yeah, it was just like as soon as the body's like, hey, it's okay now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And of course, through that time, the GI continued to improve.
Yeah.
And you're talking about vagus nerve. So you're looking at like a lot of just general motility of digestion, having more consistent bowel movements,
Yep.
less bloating, all these things. So really, like a lot of my work with GI has actually gotten more. I know a lot of tips and a lot of tricks, a lot of little things we can do in there, but it's really become even more simple as far as like how intense the protocols and stuff are
Hmm.
over the years, just because until you really balance the nervous system, the autonomic nervous system,
Hmm.
sympathetic, parasympathetic,
Hmm.
it's very difficult. It's very difficult to fully correct a lot of those issues.
Yeah.
I mean, you can, everyone's stress resilience is a little bit different. Like, yes, there are people that can handle immense amount of stress with little backlash as far as the negative feedback. Some
Mhm.
people can do a lot more than others. Um, but the vast majority of people, there's going to be so much interplay between stress and it's not just acute stress because a lot of people are just associating it with like what's happening right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's and a lot of it's really more of that allostatic load over time. It's like, okay, but what have you done to yourself over the past
Yeah.
5 years and 10 years?
Yeah.
And it's like that's where stuff gets hard because now it's like, okay, well, I'm in a good place now. I said, okay, that's a great start, but also realize that you have beat the dog shit out of yourself for the
Yeah.
past 10 years. You've done everything wrong for a decade.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like this isn't gonna miraculously be okay overnight. Um, but yeah, but to your point there, um, you really start to see acute and chronic issues when there's a lot of stress present. Like I said, motility will start to slow down. When that happens, you know, for lack of better terms, you have food sitting in the GI tract, you have increase in fermentation of food, then your bacterial overgrowth starts, then you get to bloating and blah blah. And then it just shit hits the fan. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And then it's just a cascade of all these problems over time. And so yes, we can like I can come in and say, hey, let's do these antimicrobials to kind of bring down some of this dysbiotic bacteria. We can work on this, yeast overgrowth, whatever it is, but you're still going to have a difficult time getting all the way there until we fix the root, which is the stress, because very rarely is there a case that stress is not the driver.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a large part of the conversation that people fail to comprehend and understand, whether it be coach, athlete, client, whoever, just general population. We think because, like as you mentioned, like allostatic load, you've adapted to the level of stress you perceive, and now you perceive it as not being stressful. But the fact is that you add and compound that over 5, 10 years, over several decades of stuff you haven't dealt with, you've ignored, that started to scaffold and stack up on top of each other. All of that stress starts to build up, and we're starting to get that interaction or that the complications that stress provides. And people don't really understand. Like, we talk about stress as like, oh, my boss yelled at me. Oh, I had like a blue with my wife, and we got into an argument. Cool, that's a very low bout of acute stress. You had a problem, like, but we have to look at over the years, what does stress do as a system? Well, it's telling you to fight or flight. It's telling you to run away, or it's telling you to fight this danger inside that system. Like, for anyone who hasn't read it, why the zebra gets ulcers is a fantastic initial exploratory conversation of that process. The body in a fight or flight response, meaning like you are consistently stressed, you are aroused, and you are perceiving threats or you're perceiving problems that are going to cause that arousal. The autonomic nervous system is basically stimulating. The body does not prioritize relaxing, does not prioritize digestion, mating, reproduction. It doesn't prioritize immune function. There is a direct correlation between immunosuppression and stress elevation. If those things are happening, then your ability to do things like grow tissue, relax, pull down your heart rate, digest properly, pass waste, process food, all of these, even the HPG, like producing sex hormone starts to be implicated. All these factors come into play, and then we start to see like, oh, I'm looking like shit on stage. It's like, yeah, cool. Over the last 6 months, 12 months, you haven't produced a life that is optimal to stress management or stress reduction. You've just compounded more stress instead of dealing with the initial load. Like, people think like, I've seen clients turn to a prep because it was going to solve X problem in their relationship, or it was going to ignore their financial problems, or it was going to change their career at work somehow. And all it did was mask that with greater loads of stress. And they go, oh, on the back end, it must be the trend that's causing me to not go to the bathroom properly. And it's like, yeah, that can play its role, but you're only doing 50 micrograms a week. I'm not really worried about your trend load. I'm worried about, all these other things in your life that are absolutely spiraling. And then you're wondering why you feel, look, and think like a piece of shit. Like it's not a surprise, but people don't really discuss or understand that relationship between the GI tract, the digestive pathway, digestive issues, and their psychological status.
Yeah, and so you get that kind of you get in this situation where it's like, yeah, you're lean enough, but you don't quite have the look.
Yeah.
Like you can't, like I can't get dry. It's like you're just inflamed and your
Yeah.
body's pissed.
Yeah. Doesn't like your
Your aldosterone level is fucking through the roof. You just all right. Um, but yeah, and you kind of summed it up perfectly. It's differentiating between acute and chronic stressors and understanding that. And I'll also, I'll kind of leave you with this is like the reality of stress is that the idea of getting rid of stress is pretty difficult. There's only so much you can do,
Mhm.
especially when you have high demands in your life and you are someone that is, high producer. But perception
Mhm.
is really where that's really where you're going to make the most headway, and in order to do that, awareness is first.
Yeah.
You have to become aware of what it is, and then you have to be able to recognize it and perceive it. The book you cited was great, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, and then there's other ones too. Have you ever heard of the Body Keeps Score? It's
Yeah.
another great book.
Yeah.
You just have to realize that you can go outside and stick your ass up at the sun and walk in the grass and journal and listen. These things can be, like writing in a journal can be great if that helps you unpack
Yeah.
thoughts, but at the end of the day you still are going to be presented with stress.
Yeah.
So it really boils down to how you perceive that and
Yeah.
what you do with it. And unfortunately, for a lot of the more type A people, is we don't do well with it because we can't control it.
Yeah.
We can't control it, and it's a threat to our routine,
Mhm.
right? It's a threat to our very tight, rigid
Mhm.
routine that lacks flexibility. And so when I talked about all those things earlier about flexibility and
Mhm.
hobbies and all that stuff, that is actually a really great way to enable yourself
Yeah.
to be able to handle stress a lot more adequately. And that's something that's helped me because naturally I am a very rigid black and white person.
Mhm.
But the more that I do things that are different, the more I realize I can do things that are
Yeah.
different.
Yeah.
And so when I'm presented with something, I'm like, oh, I'm going to be okay.
Yeah.
This is okay. I've done this. Right, but it's practice, man. It just takes practice. You again got to get uncomfortable. So it really does take repetition and practice, and that's something that when I'm telling these clients like to explore this stuff and explore interests, explore hobbies, it's not just because I want you to have fun. I mean, that's part of it, but it's because it will actually make you better from a flexibility standpoint if you are presented with something
Yeah.
that is out of your control. So I think that's a good takeaway.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think one of the the last points really is like one of the things I find with the psychological relationship that people struggle with is because it's not a tangible. Like we look at sleep. It's an objective metric. I can say I slept from A to B. We look at total calories. I can say I consumed X amount of food. I did.
Quantifiable.
It's quantifiable, exactly. I think that's where people struggle with trying to understand that psychological component is like when I ask you, same way when people try to rate their RPE or their RAR, and so very few people do it accurately. And it's like, what is your actual perceived stress level? Oh, it's a 10 out of 10 this week. Is it really? Because, it's not as hard as what we've done previously. There's so many more other things that could be going wrong. So how are you actually rating it? But it all comes down to that understanding of like the fact that a lot of psychological components, a lot of psychological skills, abilities, perceptions are so intangible that it's hard to actually really
For sure.
understanding and coach someone through. And I think that's where again, putting in the reps, putting in the experience, putting in the hours, practicing it has to become so important to that because otherwise you won't be able to recognize it. You won't be able to score it effectively. Know when it's time to deload. I see too many people score stress based on how the training's feeling. Like, cool, that's one component, but there's a whole other facet to this that you need to look at, which is going on up here. How are you actually feeling? Well, I'm actually probably
Yeah.
ready to kind of off myself. Well, let's deal with that. Let's probably not compete for another
Yeah.
6 months. Let's wait.
Yeah. And it's so often that I get that in an assessment, my stress is this, and then I look at the labs. I'm like, okay, your white blood cells are barely hanging on for dear life. You know, everything's tanked.
Through the roof.
Your inflammation is complete. I'm like, I and you know what? Sometimes that quantifiable data is really helpful because I can see like, hey, actually, look,
Well,
this is not good.
okay.
But yeah, but you're 100% right. It does take practice, and I try to be patient with people, and it's taken me years of practice, but at least I have that experience where I can, you know, slow. And I love when people get it, man.
Yeah, yeah.
I love when they start to get it because you can have a client that's just completely out of their damn mind, but they could end up being the best client
Yeah,
ever if they just can finally get it.
yeah.
And
Mate,
it's a beautiful thing, but unfortunately, that's still a pretty small percentage.
people. Um, Mate, appreciate your time. Got a couple of quick fire questions just to wrap up here because you got a wealth of knowledge in many different fields of what we do. Um, First question: across your journey, across your experiences, what is one piece of advice that you would give to a new athlete, a new bodybuilder, to enjoy more of the process of this game that they can take away right now and just go, I should really start doing that.
So there's a great book that I think people could read if you're into reading. You heard of the book Atomic Habits?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So they talk about one of the things they talk about in there is how focus should really be on the process and not on the goal, and how the goal is going to give you a very short-lived sense of accomplishment. And it's not that goals are bad. Of course we talk about goals, but I think that really cliche saying of enjoy the process is
Yeah.
just very that it's true. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's something that people need to understand and realize is don't compare yourself. Don't worry about what other people are doing. You're not them.
Mm-hmm.
Not only are you not them, but you don't know the context when you're looking at their posts and you're seeing all this stuff. You literally have no idea what the context of their
Yeah.
situation is now, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. So I think that really just focusing on yourself
Mm-hmm.
is a very beneficial.
Mm-hmm. And being the GI guru that you are, what is one piece of advice across a prep that someone can do to make sure that, not make sure, but try to enhance the functionality of the digestive pathway and make sure that they're at least healthy in that regard, given how bad it can get during prep?
So I'll tell you the best answer to that is make sure that there's not problems before you start.
That's always a good answer. Yeah.
Realistically, because prep's inherently stressful regardless. And like I would be lying if I said my digestion wasn't a little wonky by the end, just from,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I realized two things. A is I start in a good position and I also know what to do after I'm done.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think that if you start in a good position, you actually already have the habits in place that you can continue to apply
Mm-hmm.
during your prep. Because if you don't already have those habits, then they're not going to carry over. But if you're generally doing the right things prior, you probably will be able to maintain the vast majority of those things. Like even something as simple as relaying good feedback to your coach.
Mm-hmm.
Like, hey, I'm feeling this. Maybe we need an extra day off. Maybe we need to take a break. Maybe we need to deload. Yes, you can deload and prep, believe it or not.
Yeah. Yeah,
contrary to popular belief, like you can take a day off and that could actually benefit you in prep. But I think that you have to really learn those things first
yeah,
before you enter that state.
agreed. Final question in this regard. What is your favorite go-to refeed, cheat meal, free meal, however you want to term it? Someone like you, I know you're not going to call it a refeed, but what's a good go-to meal for you?
So in typical bodybuilding fashion, I like protein, so I would be the funny thing is I'm not actually like I'm not like really crazy about protein in general, but I really enjoy like a Mongolian barbecue or
Oh,
something like where,
yeah,
something where it's like I want all the different meats
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah. We
we
have a
did
Brazilian barbecue over here that does that. Oh,
Brazilian steakhouse,
oh yeah, it's dangerous.
stuff like that. Something like that I could definitely get on board with at pretty much any time. We did I had my first experience with all you can eat Korean barbecue after the show. That's what we
Oh,
did,
oh,
which if you've never done it, you you pick your food and then you cook it in the
yeah,
middle of your
yeah.
table. So that was people are like, "You've never done that?" I'm like, "No, I've never done it." But that was a first experience for me and that was pretty cool, which lots of protein for sure.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We do something similar with we have Japanese over here. You do that, and it's
Same
phenomenal.
thing, yeah.
Yeah.
Love that.
Oh, it's
Yeah,
amazing.
huge fan.
I was going to ask you, but in case you have a different option, one last question would be books that you recommend, or a book that you recommend we haven't already talked about on the show.
Okay, so one that I'll throw this out there. This is one I had read recently, and I'm not a big book reader. I'll just say that I know some people like I read 40 books this year. I'm not that guy, so don't look to me for that. Um, but one that I had picked up that I found really beneficial, I think would be applicable to most people. It's and you can find this on Amazon. It's called The Perfectionist Guide to Knowing When It's Good Enough.
Cool, that's good. The title,
Money,
that
dude.
is good.
Great great book. I think that it to me there was a lot of light bulbs and it did two things for me. I picked up some new nuggets, but it also kind of reaffirmed like I'm doing some of these things that are already correct.
Yeah,
Um, but it really helped break down some of those, preconceived biases and stuff that I had. And it was told from a first person perspective and then kind of gave examples and application afterwards. So it's like even if you don't like reading, you can read it.
yeah. There's actionables in it.
It's easy, easy.
That's good. That's just the title, like just like like a title is hooking. It's very like it's gonna grab you. Like you hear that title, like yeah, that's probably a good book. Some a lot of
Every bodybuilder just hearing
yeah,
the title, bodybuilders need to read that.
yeah, yeah, for sure. Anyway, mate, look, I've taken up more than enough of your time. I appreciate you jumping on from across the world. Thank you again for everything, and hopefully, you guys are listening to this have taken away a bunch of nuggets and points to, look at bodybuilding with a little bit of a different lens and actually start appreciating the journey of what we actually do.
Cool, man. Appreciate it.
If there's any links that you need to tell us about where to find you, any details, we'll put all below. So yeah, if you want to just let us know Instagram handles, YouTube, Spotify's, whatever you got.
Yep. Easiest thing to do is just go to my Instagram, at Austin ST number 8. I have a link tree in there. It'll take you to everything you need.
Fantastic.
Just hit the link tree. You can find it all.
My man, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much for jumping on.
Thank you, sir.